Hello, True Health Seeker, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Learn True Health podcast. Boy, do I have a fantastic interview for you today. This man is so amazing, and you're going to love hearing his story. In fact, he had stage 4 cancer and was basically told that he could live about 7 months if he did chemotherapy, but that's about it. He was only given about 7 more months to live. And he said, I don't think so. And he completely turned his life around. And this story is so amazing. And of course, he is still alive, still with us here today. And he has dedicated his life to be able to share this and get this information out there. You know, I was inspired by the docu-series, The Truth About Cancer. Ty Bollinger went around the world interviewing experts on different ways of healing cancer. The type of treatments that are available when we go to a standard oncologist is radiation, chemotherapy, surgery, and in some cases a hormone therapy. That's it. That's all they use. Those are the only tools. So they have 4 tools? But there are hundreds of different methods for helping the body to remove cancer, and they're effective. And there's experts around the world that are effectively using these tools, doing it in a healthy way, supporting the entire body so they build it up instead of tear it down. And my guest here today is a prime example of what happens when you take on your own health and you learn from all these experts and you utilize these natural therapies. He is now completely cancer-free, and he is living in a state of healing rather than in a state of creating cancer. You'll learn more from my guest, but first I want to let you know that I absolutely recommend that you should check out the docu-series, The Truth About Cancer. Once in a while, they release the entire 9-episode docu-series to the public for free. I highly recommend you check it out. They just released it a little while ago, and I know they'll be releasing it again soon. Go to learntruehealth.com/cancer and put your email in, and they'll notify you the next time that they release it for free. Or you can purchase it. You can purchase the DVDs or the digital downloads. I purchased the DVDs because I saw a huge benefit when I was watching it live the first time when they first released it about 2-3 years ago. It was so amazing that I knew I wanted it in my library. It's something that I take and I lend and share with my friends who are diagnosed with cancer, or I sit down and watch it with them. It gives them hope. It gives them tools. Even if you still are going to work with oncologists, it gives you so many tools that you can go there and ask the right questions, and it helps you, gives you all the tools that supports you in being able to navigate your care and build your team, just like my guest did today. Now, my guest has an incredible story. He also has an incredible website, and I definitely want you to go to that as well. So first, go to learntruehealth.com/cancer, put your email in. You'll receive notifications when Ty Bollinger is releasing his docu-series to watch for free. Or you can, of course, buy his docu-series, which I highly recommend. And then what you want to do is you want to go to quest2curecancer.com, and that is the website of my next guest. And he actually is basically giving all of his information away for free right now. You put in your name and your email into his website, and he wants to create a community and share with them everything that he did to make his body go from stage 4 cancer to stage nothing cancer, no cancer at all, in a matter of months. So I highly recommend you do that. Go to quest2curecancer.com, put in your name and email, join his community. He's helping people learn how to prevent as well, which is so important because 1 in 2 women, I'm sure you've heard me say this, 1 in 2 women statistically are going to get a diagnosis of cancer in their lifetime in America and in other countries as well, and 1 in 3 men. Cancer's on the rise. Other diseases like diabetes, other metabolic diseases, cancer isn't like this island all to itself. Oftentimes, someone who develops cancer will have other metabolic diseases or develop other metabolic diseases. And that's because, as we discussed with my guest today, we created an environment. The body created an environment to promote these illnesses, and we can create an environment to optimize the body's ability to heal. So go to learntohealth.com/cancer, sign up for the next viewing of the docu-series, The Truth About Cancer. Definitely check out my guest's website, questtocurecancer.com. These links are going to be in the show notes of today's podcast, so you can go there to check them out at learntruehealth.com. Enjoy today's episode, and please, if you have anyone in your life who has cancer, please share this with them. Please share, especially those who have cancer or have a recent diagnosis, because it's going to give them hope to know that, yes, you can cure yourself, you can heal, you can get on the other side of what may seem like a life sentence. Share this episode to help your friends have hope and know that they can get on the path, they can clean up their body and get their body back into a state of healing and health. Enjoy. Welcome to the Learn True Health podcast. I'm your host, Ashley James. This is episode 154. Today we're in for such a treat. We have an amazing guest with us, and this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. Now, Eric Remensperger, you have created a wonderful website, and you have such an amazing mission. I'd love for you to start by sharing your story and what led you to fighting this fight that I so believe in.
Well, thank you, Ashley. Thank you for having me on your show. I love your show, and you have some terrific guests. I'm happy to be part of that lineup. Let me go. I don't want to go too far back because I don't want to take too much time on my past, but I think it's useful for the listener to know that I wasn't always into wellness. I didn't really get started in kind of my passion for wellness until I hit about 40 years old. Prior to that, I lived in New York. I'm an attorney now. I was an attorney then. And I had kind of the work hard, play hard mentality where I was a heavy smoker and heavy drinker and a workaholic. And my idea of exercise was going outside and have a cigarette. And it wasn't until I transferred out to Los Angeles from New York, and about 2 years after that I got into this kind of wellness space. And I started off kind of just as a gym rat, going to the gym every day and using what I call the men's health diet, which is a lot of Myoplex shakes after you do your heavy workout, high protein, low fat. And I got myself really physically toned for the first time in my life, but I had all sorts of health issues that just kind of plagued me for a long, long, long time. I'm talking decades. And some of these health issues finally kind of came to a head, and I decided I had to do something about it. And so I kind of gave up on my traditional doctor, who I love dearly. He's a wonderful doctor, but I gave up on him, and I took my first dive into it by doing acupuncture. And the acupuncturist that I used was very, very talented, and it really did a wonderful job of kind of clearing up all these chronic conditions. So I had kind of opened my eyes then to this whole concept of something alternative to the fact that we're just machines, burning calories. And that's kind of what got me started. And so I went from, a lot of dietary, transformations. I was a vegetarian / vegan, mostly vegetarian, not vegan for all that long. I was a raw primal diet. The Agenus van der Planets, raw meat, raw dairy, raw eggs, raw honey, raw butter. And I did that for a while, and I kind of got into all these crazy things, and I was dabbling in all sorts of things. And I kind of stumbled into the paleo diet and eventually ketosis. And so that's on the dietary side. On the movement side, I went from being a gym rat to really being a yogi, and I got very, very involved in yoga and breath work and meditation, and really kind of did more broad approach to wellness generally, not just focusing on nutrition. And that's where I was in the middle of last year, 2016, when I was and I was attending a lot of conferences, the Paleo FX conference and the Bulletproof conference and others. And I was at the Paleo FX conference in Austin, Texas last year, and I started having my first real symptoms of a problem, physical ailment. And prior to that, I had a chronic cough, and that was as bad as it got. And so I was having trouble urinating, and I had spasms in my bladder, and I anticipated it. I kind of attributed, I should say, to the fact that I was experimenting with an electrostim device on the exhibit floor, and I had them put it on my lower abdominal muscles and turn it full blast to kind of show off to my friends. And of course, I had to stand there and look like it was totally painless, and I was dying the whole time. And I thought, well, maybe I just kind of tweaked my nerves and my bladder, and this will clear up. And when I got back to LA a week or so later, it was still bothering me. So I went to see a doctor for the first time since I moved to Santa Monica from Manhattan Beach about 10 years prior. And the doctor did some blood work and did an examination, and he said, you really need to see a urologist because your prostate is definitely not feeling anything close to normal, and my PSA level came in at 21.1, which is extremely high. Ideally, you want to be less than 1, although I think you can be up to 4 and 5 and not to worry about it. Although there are, and we can get into this, but I don't want to get too down this rabbit hole this early, but there are reasons for high PSA that are not cancerous. Anyway, so I saw a urologist, and he did a whole battery of tests on me, including an MRI, a CAT scan, a bone scan, and a biopsy. And, he was pretty cautious in telling me that if he were a betting man, he'd say I had cancer, but the biopsy would be the final arbiter. And I was convinced the whole time that what I had was benign prostate hyperplasia, which is because I was too healthy to have cancer. I mean, I was, organic and nothing but grass-fed beef and spring water and healthy and not eating too much meat and everything else. I was doing everything right. So there's no way I could have cancer. And I'd been doing that for about 20 years. And when the biopsy test results came in, it was a Wednesday night. I remember I was sitting at home and the phone rang. And I could tell by the tone of his voice that the news wasn't good. And he said, I got your test results. He didn't mince words. He said, you have, he already knew it would look like stage 4 because it was outside the prostate. So it was technically outside. It was in the lymph nodes into the bone. But he said the biopsy came in and tested positive in all 12 sites that they tested. It was Gleason score 9, which is extremely aggressive. And prostate cancer is generally not that aggressive. So I was completely shocked. I mean, I don't know how to explain it other than, when you have low blood sugar and you stand up and you feel like you're going to pass out. That's kind of what I felt like, but it was more like my world had just come to a complete stop. And of course, I questioned everything I'd been doing to be healthy up to that point. Was I wasting my time, and should I just continued smoking and eating fast food? Because here I was facing some very kind of difficult health condition. And so I kind of went into a little bit of a poor me for a couple of days, but it didn't last very long. And I when I kind of woke up one morning feeling like this really could be a blessing, because I'm a big believer in gratitude. And I thought this could be really the best thing that happened to me. I mean, who knows? It may take my life, but it's gonna give my passions something to really hang its hat on. My passion had found a purpose, and that is, let me really kind of do a deep dive and really study what my options are, and really study what cancer is, and really kind of come to my own conclusions as to what causes cancer. Because I wanted to put together a whole series of, potential healing therapies and protocols, but I didn't know where to begin until I had a sense for exactly what I was fighting, what I was dealing with. And, being an attorney, I'm always looking at context. And so it kind of gave me a little bit of a leg up in kind of considering all the options that are out there. But I'm sure your listeners well know, because I've heard several of your podcasts on this particular topic. And so they're well aware of this whole Warburg theory and the impact on the mitochondria and all that. But I can just talk briefly about that because, I read, first of all, when I came out of my funk and decided I was going to go both feet in as deep as I could into this, I read 14 books in 21 days, and some of them were, just traditional oncology, radiologists, oncologists, doctors of traditional medicine who were kind of talking about all the wonderful things that they can do now to address cancer. Although I think the numbers don't lie, and if you looked at kind of the success rate, we haven't made much in the way of advances other than certain types of cancer. There's a few that we've made some good advances in, but others we really have made none in the last 60 years. And so that was kind of, they were kind of basing their entire premise on this cancer being kind of some dysfunction within the DNA, right? And then there was Otto Warburg, who's kind of gotten a lot of good press lately, because when he was given the Nobel Prize in the 1930s, I think it was, he had studied cancer and discovered that all cancer cells share a certain trait, and that is they don't use this normal respiration process to produce energy. For some reason, they convert to a very kind of prehistoric, pre-oxygen on the planet way of generating energy.
Mm-hmm.
which all cellular life had to use before there was oxygen, and this is the burning of glucose, right? The fermentation process and the byproducts of that. And it's a much less efficient way of generating energy, which means that cancer cells require a tremendous amount of glucose in order to survive. And so that's how they do, for example, some of the tests, the MRI tests, they give you, some glucose that has, elements in it that can be viewed on the screen, and they actually, and the cancer cells just suck it up, right? And so they can look and see these little concentrations of these radiological elements in the glucose, and they say, oh my goodness, you have cancer there, because it's just like a little sponge and it just sucks up all the glucose. And so I looked at both, and I decided that I thought it made a lot more sense. Part of it because I was studied in Chinese medicine and the whole energetic stuff, which we can touch on briefly in a moment. And so I came to the conclusion that Warburg was right, and that we're wasting a lot of time and money looking for a cure within the DNA strain, and there really won't be a cure, because even the same type of cancer, like breast cancer or prostate cancer or colon cancer, there's no common DNA pattern. They're all different. And so that's why they've had very little success using the Genome Project as a basis upon which to kind of go down and see if they couldn't find a cure. And I think the most telling thing for me in this kind of analysis was something that Tom Seifried has spoken of, and it also comes up in Travis's book, Tripping Over the Truth. This study where they took the nucleus of a cancer cell and they put it into the cytoplasm of a healthy cell without its nucleus. And this reconstituted cell was then injected into, I think, 68 mice or something like that. And only one of the mice grew a tumor over a 1-year period. So clearly the mitochondria within the cell had somehow silenced the disease. Another university kind of mimicked that study with 10 mice, and none of them got cancer. And then what they did was they turned it around, and they took the nucleus of a normal cell, and they added it to the cytoplasm of a tumor cell without its nucleus, which of course is where the DNA is. And 98% of the mice developed cancer. So if that's not, to me, the most compelling evidence that what we're dealing with here is a mitochondrial dysfunction and not a DNA problem, I don't know what is. I don't know what is. And I think if you can focus on the health of the mitochondria, and of course, Warburg didn't know about the mitochondria because it hadn't really been discovered at much depth when he did his studies, and it came out later. I think Pete Peterson was a doctor who actually went down the rabbit hole and really studied Warburg's theories and looking at the mitochondria, and he came to the conclusion this was in fact a mitochondrial dysfunctional disease. That kind of gave me some real roadmaps or guideposts that I could use in determining what the protocols might be and how I might address cancer. But it still didn't answer the ultimate question, which is, okay, I'm totally on board with this concept of a respiratory problem. And now now I need to know what caused the respiratory problem. I want to go behind the curtain and now see kind of where that comes from. Like where did that come about? And so I think based on my understanding of Chinese medicine, and I'm not a doctor of Chinese medicine, but I was an investor in a holistic center when I first got started on this journey in 1997. I teamed up with my doctor, the acupuncturist I mentioned earlier, and he and I opened this wellness center, holistic center. And I spent a lot of time in there where he would talk about this stuff. And so I really kind of developed at least a layman's understanding of how it all worked. And I've done a lot of acupuncture since then. I've used acupuncture on occasion since then. It's this whole idea of energy, and they call it qi. It's spelled Q, capital Qi, but it's pronounced like a CHI, qi. And this is the source of all life. And Chinese medicine basically looks at qi and tries to look for places in your body where qi is either stagnant or you have an excessive amount of heat or coolness. There's areas that could be deficient, that sort of things. But they're always focusing on this energy. And the prostate happens to be, I think, a pretty good marker for me anyway, because that's the root chakra for those who understand the 7 chakras. And the root chakra is the source of procreative and protocreative energy. Procreative meaning obviously procreation, sexual energy, and protocreative being kind of the desire to get out of bed and get out and conquer the world, that form of creativity, not so much, painting a beautiful painting, but really kind of this yearning. And those were 2 areas in my life where I was completely stagnant for about 3 or 4 years, for all sorts of reasons that I don't want to get into now. And so when I look back at all the energy that I put into being healthy, I had put no focus at all into my energy, into kind of where my energetic flow was and keeping healthy energetically. So I felt, okay, this could add some additional credence to my theory about this whole business on respiratory issues and what might cause that. And then I did a really deep study of the work of a guy named Wilhelm Reich, who was around. He was actually another German who came to America to escape Nazi Germany. I don't think Warburg did. I think he stayed in Germany because they named a hospital after him or something. But Wilhelm Reich came to America, and he was very much into the energetic sources of all illnesses, and cancer he did a lot of work on. But he's the guy who came up with this whole concept of orgone energy, which the word orgone is derived from orgasm, which got him into all sorts of trouble because in the 1940s, that was not something you would want to talk about. But what he said is that everything in life really is, there's a pattern to all of it. And even single cellular organisms follow kind of the same pattern as multicellular organisms like human beings, in that we have kind of this pulsing effect, this redox effect. And he said in the autonomic nervous system, you have a constant expansion and contraction, which he was able to somehow visually see based on his laboratory equipment and studies. And he said when someone has what he calls biopathic shrinking, which is when the autonomic nervous system is not pulsing, there's no redox, it's only shrinking. That's person's highly vulnerable to getting cancer or has cancer. And I thought that was kind of interesting. So I really kind of did some real study on his work, and decided that there really was a very strong energetic element to this. Which led me to conclude that a lot of the therapies would require getting back to this healthy biopathy. He found two forms of life forms, two forms of qi. He didn't see it like the Chinese did, is within our bodies. He saw it in everything. It's in the atmosphere, it's in water, it's in our bodies. And the two are what he called PA bions, which are the healthy bions, the life-giving bions, and then the T bacilli, which are the more putrefaction. That's when things are degenerating and kind of breaking down to their original components. And cancer obviously has a lot of kind of negative energetic components to it, because it does a lot of it has a big impact on surrounding cells by virtue of the production of lactic acid, et cetera. Creating a very high acidic environment within. Just, we can get into the whole pH thing, but a lot of people think, addressing your pH and trying to become more alkaline can address cancer. I beg to differ. I do think there's a pH component to it, but I don't think it's a cause. I think it's an effect. Mm-hmm. And I also think, by the way, that the DNA damage is not a cause. It's an effect too. It might occur fairly early on in the cancering process, but it's not what leads to cancer. It's what comes from finding yourself in a cancering state. Let me just mention that I like to use cancer as a verb. People are either cancering or they're healing. We're all, and this is something that I think no doctor or scientist could disagree with. Everyone is producing cancer cells in their body all the time. And it's just a question of how your system is handling those cells. And if your immune system is functioning well and the cells are acting like good little soldiers, then you don't have any issues. When you're diagnosed with cancer as a disease, by the time it's diagnosed, I think it's just a symptom of what's been happening for a long time, which is you've been in a cancering state for a while, and you need to do what you can to shift your body back into a healing state. And there's several different ways you do that. And as you can kind of put those building blocks in place and kind of move yourself back into a healing state, you'll find the cancer will start to regress. At least that was my experience. And so I just went total ape. I don't know if I can use the word S, and I just went absolutely crazy, and threw as much as I could at it that fit within that kind of matched my theories, and so that's kind of where I found. And then of course it was literally 7 months later. I was in my urologist's office, and he was doing his examinations on me. There's two. He was doing a digital exam, and he was also doing ultrasound, and he said, your prostate is perfectly normal. It feels normal. It's a normal size. it's, your lymph nodes are all normal. There's no evidence of any further cancer spreading in your bones. It looks to me like you're in full remission. And of course, that was great news. And people like to say, Eric cured himself of cancer. Well, I'm always a little bit gun shy about using the word cure because, again, we're always producing these cells. I think what I've done is I've allowed my body to do what it's designed to do, which is to get back into this healing state. And I've really kind of hit cancer as hard as I could with all sorts of kind of some therapeutic interventions, but mostly lifestyle interventions and things that anybody can do and should do if they're trying to avoid cancer, as a way of kind of pushing myself back into that healing state.
I love your story. I'm so moved by it. So many people have that diagnosis of cancer these days, and they're hit with the fear and the panic. And then they're rushed off to the oncologist appointment and the surgeon appointment. And then the next week they're booked in for chemo or radiation or surgery. And it's like they're put on this conveyor belt. And if they try to get off or ask questions to this very fast paced conveyor belt through the cut, burn, and poison method of allopathic medicine, they're given the fear, method.
Yes.
Basically, it's like,
Yes.
my friend, I don't know if you know this, but my friend was diagnosed with breast cancer. At the time they thought it was stage 3B, and then later discovered it was stage 4. It was a very aggressive form of inflammatory, it was a tumor the size, I mean, when she first discovered it, was like, it seemed like it was about the size of a walnut. By the time we had gone through her appointments, it was the size of a softball. So, I mean, it was like, yeah, it was growing. And so I went to all of her appointments with her, and she's very on board with holistic medicine. So this scared her because she saw both her sister. Actually, she'd held her sister's hand as she died of cancer, or the cancer treatments, whichever one it was. And then came home, and that like next week got diagnosed with breast cancer. So the emotion, and she had seen her father had pancreatic cancer, went totally like healthy eating, avoided the treatments, and lived for a significant amount of time. And then his family feared him into getting the treatments, and then he died shortly after. So she, in her mind, in her model of the world, she saw that people died of the treatments, the standard allopathic treatments to cancer, and not cancer itself, or at least the treatments get you before the cancer does, is what happened in her model of the world. And so she was terrified, right? But she wanted to be proactive. And so I highly recommend anyone who's going to go see doctors take a friend with them that can stay neutral, that can absorb the information, take it in, ask the questions you want to ask. Because she was just like deer in the headlights, and she had a notebook, and she was trying to be prepared. And she went in with all these questions, and then the oncologist kind of has this authoritative stance, and it really intimidated her. And so we saw 2 oncologists, and because the best thing you can do is interview more than one doctor, more than one style of doctor. Don't go with the first opinion, go get second and third opinions, and go to different clinics, or different, don't stay all under one roof. Right.
Right.
And
actually, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, you had a point.
No, I was going to say, I completely, my heart goes out to your friend, because that's the experience that I had. I was very clear when I interviewed doctors that I would only accept the advice of a doctor that I felt I could work with. Mm-hmm. And so I saw some very well-known, well-established doctors who just kind of barked at me when I had to do. And, it's almost like, and this is your life too, you're not buying a car, but when you walk into a showroom of a dealership and you want to buy a car, they don't want you to walk out unless you bought the car.
That is so funny you say that, because the second oncologist we saw, we asked her, we weren't being pushy with her. We were just asking her kind of all the questions, like the amount of investigation you'd put into buying a car. We were putting that much effort and research into what kind of route she was going to take. And during the interview with this oncologist, she said, "You're making me feel like a used car salesman." I'm like, well, you're the one pushing your treatment. And we asked, so this type of chemo that you recommend for our friend, what's the percentage of people that develop leukemia? Because we asked, like, what is the side effect, right? Well, leukemia is a side effect of of chemotherapy. We said, what in this type of chemotherapy you want my friend to take? What is the percentage? She goes, oh, it's very low. 0.5% of people develop leukemia. And my husband stood up. He was so angry. He goes, that's 1 in 200 people. That is not a low number.
Wow.
Like, she's trying to, sell it off like it's very low. I'm like, I'm not going to, stand to think that that's a low number. But my friend, thank God, she did all this research, went to all these naturopaths and holistic health practitioners as well. She did keto, she did organic food, she did like $5,000 a month worth of supplements, and then she integrated because she stopped the growth of the tumor. And then she integrated a type of metronomic chemotherapy, and the tumor melted away, and she is now completely in remission, 100%, and that's the program that she piecemealed together with all the healthcare practitioners that worked for her. But she had to really constantly fight for the care that she wanted, because they were pulling her in a different direction. They wanted her to do different things. And one of the oncologists basically called her stupid. And one of them said, if you were my wife, I'd tell you you're crazy and you're stupid and you should do this or you're going to die. And she of course didn't follow his work. But if this is how my one friend, with advocates in the same room, are treated, I can't imagine what people are treated when they're alone.
It's very distressing. I have to tell you a story too that kind of fits into that, and that is, I was interviewing a gentleman who's supposed to be the best oncologist in Los Angeles, specializing in prostate cancer. And he was pushing me to do, first of all, surgery was not an option for me because it was outside the prostate, which in hindsight I'm grateful for, because they would have just ripped out my prostate.
Mm-hmm.
But he was trying to convince me to do chemotherapy in conjunction with my androgen deprivation treatment. And this is what he said to me. I kid you not, actually. He said, if you do, it's been shown that if you do that, it'll extend your life by 7 months.
Meaning you'll die after 7 months.
You'll live 7 months longer. I looked at him, I paused, and I kind of gave him this kind of stare, and I said, do you really believe that? I said, how could any study possibly reach that conclusion? How do you know a person would have died on December 7th had they not to chemotherapy? Now they're going to live to July 7th. I said, this doesn't make any sense to me. We're not controlled. We're not living in a petri dish. You can't control for all the variables that affect health. So to me, the fact that that's so-called evidence, that is evidence-based medicine, believe it or not. And that shows you how bad evidence-based medicine can be. And then I told him, and you'll like this one too, Ashley, I said, I would rather die 7 months early than go through chemotherapy. Mm-hmm. I would. If that pain and suffering is going to only buy me 7 months, no, I'm just going to let it go. And that's what people face. They really do. And I think if you say what's the one of the biggest takeaways, I would say I think it's important for people to, if they get the diagnosis, unless I had an acute condition, right? I couldn't urinate, so I was, that to me is something you can't just sit back and say, well, I can take my time. I needed to be able to get my bladder to function again. So if you have an acute condition, by all means, but if you don't have an acute condition, don't rush into things until you've really done your analysis and really kind of study the condition and study what it is. Because, and to get back to what you just mentioned earlier, Tom Seyfried's book, Cancer is a Metabolic Disease, which is like a textbook, and it's probably the best book out there on cancer as a metabolic disease, but it's, $200 textbooks for like students. He dedicated his book to the millions of cancer patients who died or suffered due to their cancer treatments. Mm-hmm. That's who he dedicated the book to. And so I see it all the time. When your listeners are watching those tearjerker movies where there's a young child in bed, with no hair, dying of cancer, that no hair is not the cancer. Mm-hmm. That no hair is the chemotherapy. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of things you can do that have chemotherapeutic effects that are healthy, that don't kill your healthy mitochondria or destroy your cells or your immune system. And, I say oxidative stress is one. There's a lot of the protocols that I use fall into the category of oxidative stressors, because what I want to do is really want to get a lot of oxygen into my system. I don't want any area of my body to have hypoxia, because I think hypoxia, I mean, they can actually produce cancer cells in petri dishes by reducing the amount of oxygen that the cells get.
So for those who don't know, hypoxia is a lack of oxygen.
Right, right. And
How would
so,
someone get hypoxic? I mean, is it just basically like sitting around watching TV, not moving your body, eating pizza and fried food and smoking cigarettes? Is that like,
well, yeah, boy, there's so many different ways you can create a hypoxic environment. I think you can get hypoxia if you get exposed to, like for example, let's say you're exposed to a lot of high energy radiation, right? We know that causes cancer, right? That in effect shuts down the mitochondria. So even your body may not be hypoxic, but your mitochondria are no longer able to respirate. That's an oxidative stress problem. Your body is not being able to use oxygen in a way to create ATP. And so there's that. There's the energetic stuff which you talked about earlier, where you just don't have any flow within a certain part of your body. You might have, I don't know, you might have some real serious problems with your immune system and just have too many heavy metals in your body that create kind of a condition where your cells are no longer able to respirate properly. I think a lot of this kind of ties back to the respiration issue if you follow the Warburg theory to its conclusion. And so a lot of the therapies are oxidative therapies, things that will actually create a very oxygen-rich environment, because the cancer prefers oxygen-free environment. Oxygen is, even cancer a lot of cancers cannot survive in a highly oxygenated environment, but even those that can won't burn oxygen. They still won't use oxygen as a source of energy. They'll continue to use the fermentation process. So I think oxidation or oxidative stress is, now obviously you don't want to go crazy on this stuff, but I think people can go crazy with antioxidants and they don't understand the redox effect. And so everything they say, this is a good antioxidant, that's a good antioxidant. I'm just going to do everything in my life that's good antioxidant, and I'm just going to have nothing but, electrons being gathered and electrons being spun off. You don't have any energy production. The electron transport chain requires both. It requires oxidation and reduction, and you need to have both. And so, I think it's, for example, hyperbaric oxygen is an obvious example. That's something that I think you're probably well aware of. I know Dom D'Agostino, who's very kind of knowledgeable in the area of the ketogenic diet and ketosis, and has been doing a lot of studies to help the Navy SEALs and divers deal with, toxic diving illnesses. He's an expert in that space, and hyperbaric oxygen is one of the therapies they use, and that's how they kind of discovered that it was a way of reducing. I don't think there have been any studies on this, but I've had so much anecdotal evidence. I actually met a gentleman when I was at the Metabolic Therapeutics Conference in Tampa, Florida last February. And he's from London. It's his first time coming to the United States. He had glioblastoma. He had been in therapeutic ketosis before he had surgery. So his surgery was more successful than it otherwise might have been, because the cancer cells had obviously been kind of coagulated by the lack of glucose and forced to burn ketones. But he was doing thermal imaging as a way of tracking the progression of his disease, and it still showed that he had cancer. Even though on a normal scan they said you're cancer-free, thermal imaging still showed there were some cancer cells in his brain. And the only thing he changed was he did some hyperbaric oxygen, and it cleared it up, completely cleared up the cancer cells. Those rogue cancer cells just disappeared. And so anybody, I would say, and again, I'm not a doctor, this is not medical advice, I have to be very clear about this. I'm just talking from my own experience, based on my own analysis, my own read of the evidence. But based on my interpretation of the evidence, anybody who's confronting metastatic metastases or the possibility of cancer becoming metastatic should be doing hyperbaric treatment. As a way of kind of reducing. And I did it 3 days a week. I was doing it 3 days. Now I do it once a week. It's just kind of a precautionary measure. I also used ozone, which I'm sure you know is also a therapy that's quite often used for Lyme disease and other things too, but cancer is one of those. And ozone, for those who don't know, is basically an oxygen atom. It has 3 atoms instead of 2. And it's extremely toxic to cancer cells and fungus and a lot of things, not just cancer cells. And so I've done ozone rectal insufflation daily, and now I do it 3 days a week, where you actually take ozone gas, you take an oxygen tank and you run through an ozone machine, you put it in a little bladder and you squeeze it up your butt, and you hold it in for 15, 20 minutes, and it gets that ozone into your blood. And there was a study done back in 1980 that showed that exposure to as little as 0.8 parts per million of ozone can inhibit the growth of cancer cells by more than 90%, because they just don't have the ability to defend themselves against this. So that's another kind of oxidative stress that I adopted.
I totally find ozone fascinating. I don't know if you heard of the HITS Center down in Tijuana. Dr. HITS is HITTS, I believe.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I have friends who went to Dr. HITS, and one of my friends she basically walked into the center with cervical cancer, walked out of the center a few days later without cervical cancer. And how it was described to me was she went in and she had her file like with all her medical records, and he's an American doctor, but he is, across the border because that's where he can do all of his, shenanigans that the FDA wouldn't let him do.
Right.
And so she has all her lab tests and everything she's ready to hand over to him. And instead he takes a swab of her nose and puts it under a microscope in front of her and looks at the nasal tissue that's on the swab, and he looks up to her. He hasn't read any of her charts yet. He says, we need to get you a pap smear because I think that you have cervical cancer. And she looks at him. She kind of is a little irritated, and she says, well, if you just read this, my files that I brought with me, you'd know that that's what I have. But but I'm like, how did he figure out, like, look at nasal tissue? Yeah, I thought that was so cool. And then basically they take they take your blood, they put it through ozone. So they put ozone into your blood, and then they pump it back into you like an IV. Okay. And how they described it to her and how she described to me was that ozone will explode the viruses and bacteria and everything that's been in your body, because whatever we've been exposed to in our life, our immune system's constantly having to deal with. And it's not like any virus will actually go away. It's just our body figures out how to deal with it. But that over time we have this giant viral load or bacteria, fungus, or whatever load in our body, and so the ozone will explode all of it. And then that's the first time in our life where our immune system can finally dedicate 100% of its energy to healing what needs to heal. And then also my two other friends went there with horrific immune issues and allergies, and they walked out free and clear. And so after hearing about that, like 15 years ago or something like that, I first heard of this ozone. I thought it was absolutely fascinating. And so to know that you do it at home and you do it rectally, and then it actually can get into your blood that way is fascinating, because then you don't have to travel all the way down to Tijuana.
Right. That's right. Yeah, my integrative doctor actually has an IV room, and I met several people in there doing ozone in the blood. Most of them, some cancer patients, but most of them were Lyme disease. I think Lyme is kind of prevalent. It's like the disease. There's just a lot of Lyme now. Mm-hmm. But yeah, and it's just, if you can do it every day, obviously you're going to get, early on in the treatment protocols, you're going to get better result in it. And you can't go sit in that IV chair every day. You would have, it'd be too expensive. Mm-hmm. And time consuming.
Yeah.
So ozone, I think, is important. Hyperbaric oxygen is important. I think high dose vitamin C is very important. And a lot of people don't realize this because they think of vitamin C as an antioxidant. And it is an antioxidant when it's taken in normal doses. But when you get into very, very high doses, like 50 grams or 75 grams of vitamin C, it actually becomes an oxidative stressor, right? It converts to hydrogen peroxide in your system, and it's that hydrogen peroxide that kind of creates that oxidative stress environment. And I think Dr. Reardon, who's kind of the Reardon Clinic's done a lot of studies on this. In Japan, it's very common to use high-dose vitamin C as a therapeutic intervention from cancer. And obviously, Linus Pauling is kind of the grandfather of it. But Reardon's goal is to get your blood level to 400 milligrams per deciliter after you get your IV in order to really kind of get the benefits of that oxidative stress. And he said it's just found in his clinical trials and studies he's done at the Reardon Clinic, it really helps induce apoptosis in your cancer tumor cells. So I've gone from 25 grams to 50 grams to 75 grams on an IV basis to try to get up into that 400 milligrams per deciliter level. And the way it does it is it has to do with iron. I just learned this the other day. Iron is the only component in our blood that makes our blood different than what's in plants that causes. In other words, what makes our blood different than what causes energy from the sun in plants. And it's the interaction of iron with the oxygen that causes this creation of hydrogen peroxide. And this again goes back to what I mentioned earlier, this whole idea of redox therapy, this ebb and flow of electrons.
Mm-hmm.
You want this oxidation to cause electrons to move out, and then reduction cause them to be gained back in. And it's a cycling effect. And so that's another way of, and I think you mentioned something interesting that I think is important for people to be aware of too, is a lot of these therapeutic interventions will result in kind of dead cancer cells in your system. So you really need to be clean. You really need to make sure that your lymphatic system and your liver and you're getting good sleep. All these things are part of the detoxification process to get that stuff to clear out. Because I think what Wilhelm Reich found is that a lot of people that he was using his orgone treatment to address cancer, it would kill the cancer, but then they die from the clogging up of their system and unable to clear out all that debris.
Mm-hmm.
Is another kind of, so I think it's you can't ignore that. You got to kind of have a good balance between how you're going to address the cancer and try to use your own natural chemotherapeutic ways of killing cancer, but also keeping your system functioning well enough to keep it clean and keep it clear. And can't lose sight of that. That's very, very important.
You remind me of Dr. Hammer's work, meta-medicine, because in his work in studying cancer, he sees that there's a correlation in the emotional mental side of things,
Mm-hmm.
and he can trace it back to doing brain scans. Have you heard of meta-medicine or Dr. Hammer's work?
I've heard of it. I'm not that familiar with it, but I do recall the brain scan stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So really interesting German scientist who lost his son. And so he ended up, it became his passion to study this. And he had over 30,000 case studies where he did the brain scans, and he could see centrifugal rings, like almost edema on the brain. And that position in the brain would be correlated with the disease. So if it's in this one point in the brain, it's always breast cancer. If this other point in the brain, it's always liver cancer. Right. And he would then trace back. He did, detailed personal histories. He's not like a woo-woo guy. He's very science-based, but he would see that there would be emotional mental conflicts that had happened in that person's life that they were so unable to process that it ate them alive, basically. And that not only could he basically do a brain scan and tell you what disease you have, where it's cancer, but also other diseases, because he would see this edema on the brain. And he believes that every headache we have, almost every headache we have is related to a healing crisis that we're going through. And that he could take someone and help them like heal a disease like cancer by removing them from the stimulus of the emotional trauma and then having them go through therapy to deal with it. But that a lot of times in doing so, they would go through a healing crisis, and there would be like they could heal the disease, but then die in the process of healing the disease, like you said. Right. So because the other organs weren't ready or healthy, or so that's something he's observed also. So you talk about being able to look at the chakra, the emotional mental conflicts that were going on in that part of your body, because you're looking at everything, taking everything as a whole. Right. So knowing that when we have disease, it's like you said, a cancerous state can be created. We have to look at what did we do emotionally to create this? What did we do mentally? What did we do energetically? What did we do physically? And what can we do to shift every area of life back into a healing mode rather than a cancer creating mode? Cancering mode, exactly. And so, and then looking at how can we support the body as a whole. So once we kill off the cancer, how is the liver going to process it? How is the kidneys, how is the whole body going to be able to flush out and handle that? So building up the body from the ground up. And I love that you're addressing that.
Yeah, I think that's, if you go to my website and you kind of look at the pillars, the first one is kind of the sources of all life, and that's the sunlight and the grounding and hydration. These are things that if this stuff is dialed in, let me phrase it in the positive. If this stuff is dialed in, you will find yourself having a lot less chronic ailments across the board, cancer is just one, obviously very kind of serious one. And you'll sleep better, and that better sleep is going to cause you to have better detoxification, which is, I mean, it's like a web. You can't take one strand out and say, let me just I'm just going to go on a plant-based diet and I'll be fine. It bothers me. I mean, I really get irked when I hear people talking about, oh, this can cure cancer, this will help. There's no one, it's a multimodal approach. It really requires that you have kind of everything. Now, you don't have to have everything dialed in perfectly, but you have to have everything dialed in well enough to function the way it should, so that your body can do what it was designed to do, which is heal itself. And, one of the reasons why I think I got sick in the first place is because I wasn't using kind of that approach. I was using the approach, if a little is good, a lot must be great, right? And I had this crazy ass shake I made every day, had 47 ingredients in it. It was just like this nutrient powerhouse. And I basically dialed in every possible nutrient I think the body could possibly need, and then I flooded myself with it. And I did that every day. I was doing that every day for years before I got cancer. And so I was the last person to get sick, because look how nutrient dense no one's getting this kind of nutrient density in their diet. But I wasn't using kind of the other part of the redox system, which is, okay, you've given your cells all the fuel it needs, and let your cells kind of have an opportunity to clear out the debris. Let's clean the house a little bit here. We need to get some autophagy going here. So why don't you just try a little fasting or intermittent fasting or something, just to kind of slow down that wagon, or do the shake 3 days a week. You know what I mean? And I wasn't doing that. I just didn't have that sense. And since then, obviously, I've developed a real sensitivity to it. And so I use fasting as a big part of my protocol. My diet is really, really nutrient dense, but it's done in a way that's kind of pulsing and giving my body a chance to kind of assimilate and digest and then clean itself out, which is what it really wants to do. And so the whole diet, I think it's interesting. Most of the questions that I've gotten from people who've gone on my site so far have focused on the dietary component of my protocols, which is great. And I know one of the reasons why, when I was so passionate about wellness for that 20-year period, diet was a big part of that, is because diet is obviously it's the thing you can really get your hands on every day, and you're feeding yourself, and you're enjoying food, and you're enjoying friends, and the social component, and it's such a big part of our life, right? We don't think of going and taking our shoes off and standing on the ground and hugging a tree as being that important. But diet is something that we really live with, and we really experience, and we get a lot of pleasure from. And so that's obviously something that people like to focus on. So I totally get that. And just to kind of answer the questions to your listeners who might have the question, my diet is a ketogenic diet, but most of the fats that I consume, and I'm very heavily fat-based, probably 70%, 65-70% fat, is plant-based fat. It's avocados, it's olives, olive oil, it's butter. I have some animal stuff, butter, ghee, coconut oil, MCT oil. I'm a big fan of nuts, right? You got to be careful, because cashews are not nuts; they're legumes. But if you stick with nuts, they're all good. And I was kind of struggling with this whole idea of, Chris from Crispy Cancer. He's a big proponent of the plant-based diet, and I know there's a lot of people have good results with that diet. And I was kind of struggling with, well, should I be on a plant-based diet? Because I really do think you need animal protein, modest amounts of it, very modest amounts of it, but you do need some oysters and some, liverwurst, and some, go out and have yourself a nice piece of healthy wild salmon, that sort of thing. And when I was at that conference I mentioned earlier in Florida, I got to meet this Dr. Q Collins, who's really studying this whole new area of science. They had a couple of panels that really kind of drilled down on this whole idea of deuterium. Deuterium is a hydrogen molecule, and it's twice as big as a normal hydrogen molecule. And it's heavy water is used in nuclear power plants. That's high deuterium water. And deuterium is a trace element, and it's a very much a trace element. It's a very, very micro dose. It's in the atmosphere. It's in water. It's in us. It's in our food. But it's in tiny portion of the hydrogen is actually deuterium. But they found if you can deplete the deuterium, you can actually end up having a very positive therapeutic effect on the ability of the mitochondria to function well, because that large hydrogen molecule gets into the mitochondria. Mitochondria uses hydrogen as part of the production of ATP. It actually gums up the works, and so they're now studying kind of deuterium depleted water, which is the opposite of heavy water, as a way of kind of seeing if that's might have some therapy. And it's all brand new, and it's hard to talk about because it's such new science. But when I was talking to Dr. Q, which is his nickname, I asked him the question. I said, how can the plant-based diet and the ketogenic diet, this whole conference was all about ketosis as a therapy, both be equally therapeutic?
Right.
And he said, because they both deplete deuterium. They're both low deuterium diets. And I think personally, in my own personal opinion, the ketogenic diet is preferable to the plant-based diet because you can't get enough energy. You can be ketogenic in a purely plant-based diet, but it's not easy. And you have certain vitamins and minerals that your body's going to be depleted. You have to supplement. B12 is one, obviously. But I think that if you can, if you can get a diet that actually has both benefits, and that plant-based diet, if you're not getting enough fats, and people still have a phobia of fat. I find even my friends who are trying to move more towards a paleo ketogenic, they still are afraid of fat, right? I'll have them over for dinner and I'll say, hey, you want some heavy whipped cream with a little stevia in it on some, dark chocolate? And they're like, no. No, that's fat. That's fat. Well, it's really not. There's not this trace amounts of sugar in the chocolate. It's like 88% cocoa, and the cream is nothing but heavy organic grass-fed beef cream, and it's just fat. And they don't want it because it's fat. So people are still fat phobic. And if you're not getting your calories from fat, you can't get your calories from protein. It just can't. Your body will reject a lot of it, and it'll convert the excess protein to glucose anyway through gluconeogenesis, which creates ammonia in the system, and that creates all sorts of problems. So they have to have a lot of carbohydrates. When I go out with my friends who are vegans to restaurants, I'm just eating a lot of carbs, and I can't, obviously, since I'm ketogenic, I can't eat that stuff. So that kind of pushed me squarely in the keto corner as far as diet was concerned, because I was toying with whether I wanted to go down the road of more plant-based diet or more ketogenic diet. I decided ketogenic, but I still have a ton of vegetables. They're great ways of getting fat, because vegetables are great places to put your olive oil and your butter and everything else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
right.
That's it in a nutshell. And then there are some kind of very therapeutic dietary, like sulforaphane or turmeric, curcumin. Mm-hmm. These are things that are extremely therapeutic that you want to make sure you get into your diet on a consistent, regular basis. And I did the RGCC test out of Greece, which will actually spin your blood and take out the cancer blood stem cells and then run it against all sorts of therapies, including standard of care therapies, and tell you which ones are most impacted, which have the biggest impact on your particular cancer progression. And mine came in like 40% for turmeric. So I'm just basically a turmeric freak, because I think anybody who has cancer should have a lot of turmeric or curcumin on the diet. But
when you cook with turmeric, do you just take the straight root and throw it into everything, or do you do the powder or a mix of both?
I do it three ways. I figured I'm going to just hit it every which way. I do sulforaphane two ways too. Mm-hmm. Turmeric, the way I do it is I obviously take the root and I grind it up into my dishes when I make a nice vegetable medley with a little bit of meat in it. I put a ton of turmeric in there, just as the root, ground fresh from the, buy it at the co-op kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Then I also take turmeric powder, which comes kind of, in a bag, and it's just a powder, and I put that in my Par d'Arco tea, which I have daily. And I'm sorry, I'm gonna plug this phone. And then I have, so that's kind of, and I do 2 heaping teaspoons of the turmeric in my Par d'Arco tea. And then I also take a supplement form that's like a pill that has turmeric in it, high levels, because I definitely want. And I'm thinking of doing an IV version of it. I was speaking to my doctor just on Monday about incorporating that into my regimen, just to kind of make sure, even though I'm in remission, I don't want to take any foolish chances.
So you healed. I know you don't like me using the word healed your cancer, but just you made the cancer go away. You didn't go the cut, burn, and poison method. You didn't get radiation, chemo, and surgery.
No, I did do androgen deprivation. Prostate cancer and breast cancer. There's a corollary. It's because that's another hormone-based cancer. They do hormone deprivation treatments as part of the standard of care. And so I did do Casodex is a form. It's a pill you take that shuts off your testosterone receptors. And then Lupron is a brand name of a particular shot. There's several different versions of it
Mm-hmm.
that you can take on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis, or twice a year. I, of course, opted to do it monthly because it was a much lower dose, and I wanted to be able to cycle off. That shuts down your body's production of testosterone. So it's, as a man, that's the last thing you want to hear is you're going to live the rest of your life without any testosterone, because it really has a huge impact on all sorts of things, not only just related to your sexual health, but your bodily health and your bones and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, for your listeners who may know someone or who they themselves may be taking Lupron or one of the equivalent shots, you can cycle off of that. And they won't the oncologist won't tell you this. But I did a lot of studies, and I went into PubMed, and I looked at a lot of these studies. And these are studies that were done by the companies that are actually selling the drug, so you know what their incentive is. And they concluded that there's no detriment to cycling off. In other words, it doesn't hurt the therapeutic effect of it. But they also said, but there's no benefit, which I think is a bunch of junk, because clearly if your body needs testosterone in order to do proper bone formation and muscle development, et cetera, why not take little opportunities if you have the option to do so, and just cycle off? And so you can always cycle back on again. And I told my oncologist that. He said, "Oh yeah, you can cycle off," but they won't tell you that.
Right.
Actually, they'll tell you, "No, you're going to be taking this drug for the rest of your life."
Right.
Right? And it's troubling to me that they're treating it as if it doesn't have any impact. Oh yeah, you'll get hot flashes and you may have a little joint pain, and but it does a lot more than that.
Mm-hmm.
So I did do that. That was the only standard of care I did, was the ADT. And by the way, the monthly shots are 10 milligrams, and the 6-month shots are 90 milligrams of the same drug. And I thought, well, I would rather do smaller doses over a period of time than one giant dose.
And it sounds like you have done a ton of research to come to the conclusions that you came to in order to formulate your care.
Right.
So I mean, I'm just imagining putting myself in your shoes back when you first had that diagnosis and you read all those books, and then you said, okay, I'm out of victim mode. I'm gonna figure out how to switch my body into healing mode. What can you share with us? Like what kept you going, kept you motivated? Were there glimmers of hope? Did you connect with people that were also had healed naturally? And how did you continue to rationalize that you were doing the right thing? Because I think a lot of people who are healing their own cancer or getting their body away from a cancering state, they often question themselves because enough of their family members come to them and tell them they're crazy, or their doctor says they're crazy. And how did you continue on the path? It's easy now that you've had success, you've crossed the finish line, and there's hindsight, right? But at the time, I know a lot of people go through, and I know my friend in particular went through that, where she even questioned her own resolve. What kept you going?
Yeah, I think there's two sides to that question, and I'm going to see if I can hit both of them. The first one is, I think, easy for me, perhaps less so for others, because I was always kind of a skeptic of the pharmaceutical industry generally, and I know how impactful the pharmaceutical industry is on the practice of medicine. And so I kind of came to the table with a healthy dose of skepticism. But again, when it's cancer and it's your life, even someone who has that skepticism might just kind of sweep it under the rug and say, look, I can't mess around with this. I'm just going to go full bore. And I think, let me just sidebar for a quick second, and that is, even those, and I'm not a doctor again, and I wouldn't tell somebody not to do standard of care, but even if you were to decide to do chemotherapy or radiation or both, with surgery or without surgery, a lot of these protocols that are very therapeutic to help your healthy mitochondria, and very detrimental to your unhealthy or dysfunctional mitochondria and cancer cells that cannot, by the way, be converted back to healthy cells. We didn't even touch on that, but that's possible. These therapies can be done in conjunction with the standard of care, and you'll have much better results. You'll end up with less side effects. You'll end up with better outcomes. So it's not necessarily you can't do standard of care. You have to pick one or the other. You can either do standard of care, or you can do these alternative treatments. Now, obviously, you're not going to do some of the IV stuff and that sort of thing. You may not. This is contraindicated. But a lot of what the healing therapies would apply to both. But to get back to your question about kind of what kind of kept me focused and kept me, you know, on the path, I think it was, I just felt like I had just, um, you know, it's going to sound very strange for me to say this, but my life really became, for the first time, really, I woke up every morning feeling blessed. I was so happy to have another day, and I was so excited to get out of bed and just jump back into what I was studying and learning about this stuff and building up this knowledge base and really kind of experimenting with all these protocols and trying to figure out how the heck can I get this stuff into my day. There's only so many hours, etc. And it was kind of like that enthusiasm you might have as a child when you're in day camp or something. You're just so happy to get out of bed in the morning. That to me is probably, Ashley, the most effective therapy of them all, which is this energetic thing, is how do you feel about you and your relationship to your particular world, the people you interact with, the relationships you're having, and your priorities. Really, it's interesting how in the past I was just a procrastinator when it came to kind of, you know, not dealing with issues or staying in a job I was not happy in, or a relationship I wasn't happy in, or whatever it is. It takes a lot of different forms. But when you face your mortality and someone looks you in the eye and says, well, if you do this for chemotherapy, you're going to live 7 more months and you got to do this right away. And this, you have stage 4 cancer. It's spreading. You know, it really changes your perspective on everything. Suddenly you just don't feel like you have nothing but a chance to kick the can down the road and deal with these issues tomorrow. And it's that, I think that alignment of priorities really kind of is just what made life so beautiful. And now I don't, you know, I don't censor myself. And if I don't want to do something, I don't do it. If I want to do it, I do it. I don't think twice about it. I don't say, well, maybe I don't want to do that because I'll wait and do it later. Or, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's just, and so I think it was a combination of those two things, i.e., you know, really having something that I was excited about, because I just felt like a little kid just learning. And I don't think I'll ever step off of that train. I don't think I'm ever going to reach the point where I feel like I've learned it all. There's nothing else for me to know. One of the reasons why I think a website is preferable to a book, although it may end up becoming a book at some point, is you can constantly update it. You know, my list of supplements, I go back and I was like, oh, I just finished reading The Plant Paradox. I'm going to take all the lectins out. And by the way, this is a lectin. So that, you know, my cayenne pepper is no longer in my list of supplements. It's gone. So, you know, it's a work in progress. I like it. I mean, that's been my passion for a long time. I'm the guy who would, you know, I like being a lawyer, but I didn't sit up at night reading books on the Uniform Commercial Code as I was going to sleep at night. That was not my thing.
Right? Right. So you're really living your passion.
Right. That's it.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
I know. This is right up my alley. You know, I could talk for hours about these topics and the studies and right before we hit record, you were telling me that one of the things you're really passionate about, which we should definitely cover this, is helping people to understand, you know, what's going on in this allopathic world. Like, you're not going to MD bash. What you are going to do is show that you really see, and you're so intelligent. I think someone who can become a lawyer has, you know, amazing amounts of brains. Like, you know, I could never do that. I just don't have the concentration to sit down and understand lawyer speak. So, but to sit down and read these studies and to see there's something going on in these studies that we're basing medicine on. So in the studies that they do, that then they base their decisions about drugs and about care, and that it's flawed. And right. That and the money, and I know this because Dr. Wallach, who's one of my mentors, was working at Yerkes Primate Research Institute in Atlanta. You know, something like between 30 and 35 years ago, he uncovered the cause of cystic fibrosis, and he did like total blind. He had other pathologists confirm his findings and then did a big write-up, and he showed that it was in utero. Selenium deficiency in utero causes cystic fibrosis. He also then went on to discover that muscular dystrophy is also caused by selenium deficiency in utero. But he wrote this paper, and instead of them congratulating him and going, oh my gosh, now all we have to do is make sure selenium's in prenatal vitamins and make sure we supplement it and fortify food with it, and make sure that the soil is, that food is grown in as enough selenium, we can totally eradicate this disease. Instead of doing that, they blacklisted him. They fired him and blacklisted him from the research community. In fact, he then he was hired by his university to be a professor, and the dean came up to him and said, I'm sorry, I have this letter, and he still has a copy of it. I have this letter that says that if I hire you, we lose all of our funding. And
wow.
he was, and now years later, they finally acknowledge him for it. And it's one of the reasons why selenium is now, which only in the last few years is now in baby formula, but that's too late. You got to get selenium in the mom before they get pregnant. Just like we know that folic acid prevents neurotube defects, right? He also uncovered that a lack of zinc causes Down syndrome. So there's lots of nutrient deficiencies in utero can cause diseases, and he's blacklisted for it. So if you look at that, it's like, well, why? It's because there's no money to be made from making sure people are fully nutrified, because you can't patent it, you can't make money off of it, and so a pharmaceutical company is only really going to put money towards research that allows them to profit, and that is a completely broken system.
Right. Yes, and let me just footnote that, because a lot of people are not aware of this, but oncology is the only branch of medicine where the doctor actually sells you the drug. The reason why doctors write a prescription and a pharmacist fills the prescription is to create more of an alignment of incentives, to avoid this kind of potential for, not that doctors would intentionally abuse the writing of prescriptions, some do, some don't, but I'm just saying oncologists only make money when they actually get you to do the chemotherapeutic stuff. And some people don't realize that.
They get thousands of dollars, right? Thousands of dollars.
That's where they make, it's like a surgeon. They only make money when they do surgery, right? They don't make money just looking at your shoulder or your hip or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, let me, because we can go down a rabbit hole on a lot of the stuff. I could point out probably 5 or 6 different potential cures of cancer that mysteriously got shut down, or not so mysteriously got shut down. In fact, there's a documentary. It's called Second Opinion: The Sloan Kettering Story, something about Laetrile, vitamin B17. It was back in 1974. Sloan Kettering actually was doing a bunch of studies to see whether or not this Laetrile actually could have an impact or therapeutic impact on cancer. And they discovered they had these special engineered rats that were designed to have tumors, and of the control group, the group that was given the B17, the Laetrile, 25% showed metastases into the lungs, and 75 of 100 didn't have any metastases. In the placebo group, it was the opposite, right? 75% ended up getting metastases. And that was the only study done, and I think there was a human trial maybe done in '82 or something. But these things were very quickly just kind of swept under the rug. Like, this doesn't really supply us with the evidence we need. What they're really saying is this doesn't supply us with the potential revenue stream we need, because you can't patent Laetrile. And there's even some drugs that have got kind of an off patent that never been used for cancer before, that are found to be potentially beneficial, like low dose naldextrose. I have that wrong. Low dose. I don't have my notes in front of me, but there's a drug that apparently in very, very low doses. I think it was a drug for people with what do you call it? Emotional issues, like a Xanax type drug. They found in very, very low doses it actually helped facilitate the functioning of the mitochondria in a way that was beneficial to cancer patients. Well, since the drug is off patent, no one's ever going to run a study on it, because they can't make any money on it. So there'll never be a clinical trial. There's never going to be clinical trials, and getting FDA approval is extremely expensive. And even drug companies that have drugs that are shown to have more than one therapeutic benefit, they only do one trial, and so everything else is off-label. Is what they call it. Off-label means the drug's approved by the FDA for one treatment, one condition, and it's used for another. That's off-label, because it's so expensive to run that process. And when you really step back and take a look at our entire medical establishment and kind of where we've gone in the last 20 years and forcing people into kind of these, health insurance based health care, because health insurance companies now are only allowed to pay for things that are falling to standard of care. And so in this country, your options are severely limited if you try to do things that are therapeutic that are outside of standard of care. Like, for example, hyperbaric oxygen, there's no question in my mind that that's, in my mind, I'm not a doctor, but there's no question in my mind that it's beneficial. But the insurance company won't pay for it because it's not under the FDA approved. There's only 21 uses of the hyperbaric chamber that are approved by the FDA, and that's not one of them. And so, I mean, that to me was, when we had the conversation prior to the call, you kind of asked me what was kind of the most shocking thing you discovered in your journey. And I think it was the difference in perspective between kind of the folks that are on that kind of allopathic train and the folks that are not. The folks that are really, really studying, these are very bright people. And I've met some great doctors and radiologists. They're smart people, but they understand a lot they have a ton of information, but in a very, very narrow bandwidth. They understand radiation treatment, and that's it. And they understand everything to do with that radiation treatment. But if you go into that radiologist office and say, look, I'd like to talk about use of a ketogenic diet in conjunction with radiology to reduce the dosage and shorten the treatment plan and make it more effective, he'll look at you like you're talking in another language, right? I can't speak to that. I need to see some real clinical trials. And of course, the companies that sell the equipment and that make money are not going to promote that because it just reduces the incidence of use. And so we have this huge disconnect, and it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate because it's, a lot of the therapies are not expensive at all. Things like sunlight and grounding and all that stuff. These are not things that you have to go out and spend a ton of money on. But some of them do cost money. I mean, a woman who wants to do even thermal imaging because she doesn't want to get a mammogram because she knows how detrimental mammograms could be to your breast and potentially even breast cancer, she's going to have to go out of pocket $200. Now, that's not a lot of money for some people, but it is a lot of money for other people. And why wouldn't everybody have the access to that? I don't get it. Why wouldn't the insurance companies pay for it? It's cheaper than a mammogram. It's because the whole system is really, I think, broken. And to me, the largest, I think, guilty party of the whole system being broken is this whole concept of evidence-based medicine, because the evidence is, it's run through these peer-reviewed publications, and the peer review means that a lot of people that think exactly the same get to look at the work and see whether they agree with it or not. And if you think outside the box, the chances of getting through that peer review process are reduced significantly, because the peers just don't see eye to eye with someone who's trying to say, wait a second, why don't we try this? This is something new, it's different, and it could be very effective.
But that's essentially what we need to, quote unquote, cure cancer. We need to think completely differently. We need to do something completely differently than what we're doing now. And so to get a bunch of people and do peer review who are all doing the exact treatments that aren't working and that are, in fact, perpetuating the cancering state, right? Those people are not, I mean, you have to do some major matrix, wake them up, unplug their brain from the reality that they've been living in. And it's hard when I look at medical school. It's really interesting. Look at what they do to MD students. They put them through this intense, they change their diet, they change their sleep patterns, they put them on and off, so they're on these crazy shifts where they're getting very little sleep. And it's kind of the same that they do in the military to mold someone's thinking. It's a way of changing people's behaviors, and it's also very similar to if you wanted to brainwash someone. I know that a few centuries ago they did these studies around how to change someone's belief system so that you brainwash them. You essentially can take someone, a prisoner of war, and turn them into a spy for you. And they were trying to see if hypnosis would do it, and LSD and all these other things. And what they found is that through changing your food, your body chemistry, by changing your food, changing your sleep patterns, and there's a few other things you can actually shift someone's complete belief system into a new belief system. And it's kind of like this weird box, this way of thinking that's like in this inside the box. And it's the same thing they do to MDs. I think it's hilarious that they kind of come out most of them come out all sort of thinking the same, and knowing that if they start to think outside the box, they're going to have their wrists slapped. That you are like Plato's the allegory of the cave, Plato's cave. You know, you try to come out into the sunlight, and then try to get everyone else to come out into the sunlight, and they'll kill you for it, because how dare you, be the crab that tries to get out of the bucket.
Right.
And so what we're going up against is, like, we are all these little voices. We have to do our own research, and thank God for the internet and your website, which I definitely want to talk about. But we have to, just like you did your own research, you advocated for yourself, you took on your supplements, your diet, your protocols. If it were up to them, they would have put you on methods that would have killed you. And you are not only alive, but you're thriving, and now you're sharing what you do, what you've done, and you share all the research. I love that you spend hours every day combing through the research, and then digesting it, and then making it easy for us to understand. And so I definitely want to talk about your website, because I know so many people are looking for resources, and not all of us can read PubMed and actually really understand the message that we need to take away from when we look at all these studies. So I'm so glad that you have that skill. So your website, let's talk about that, and talk about what you offer to us, so that we can continue to learn from you.
Sure. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to make this plug. The website is brand new. It was initially launched on May 15th. So it's fairly brand new. It took me a long time to get it up and running, because I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how best to organize this volume of material. There's just so much, and it's you've heard the tired cliche of drinking from a garden hose, a fire hose. I literally this fits into that, and I was trying to figure out how best to present all this information in a way that people can really understand and digest it. So I kind of broke it down into kind of different pillars, and then each pillar has certain elements, and then the protocols lay within the elements. And I did that intentionally, because my thought was people can kind of understand why that element is important, why that protocol, because it fits in that element, and then it fits into the pillar, and you can kind of lay it out that way. And so there are 4 pillars that are kind of necessary for anybody who's suffering from cancer. They're not just limited to people that are, anybody hoping to avoid cancer, not just limited to people that have cancer. And then there's one I call therapeutic intervention. That's the 5th element, and that's one that's specific to those that are trying to move back into a healing state. That's kind of the more therapeutic interventions. That's where you do the high dose vitamin C, hyperbaric oxygen, and other things that are kind of outside, normal. The others are sources of life force, which you talked about a bit earlier, nourishment, which covers, supplementation, food, detoxification, which covers all forms of detoxification. That's another pillar, and that would include emotional detoxification, physical detoxification, environmental detoxification, and then movement and play. And that's where you get the whole idea of passion and purpose and kind of healthy relationships and all that stuff. So those are the pillars. So the website was really kind of just put up there so people have access to this information. And right now it's kind of, I'm just building a subscriber base, so I'd love it if people would go on there and subscribe. Right now, I'm not offering anything specific other than I'm going to reach out to my subscribers with a questionnaire shortly, asking them really to kind of help me. And I have a list of posts, specific blog posts on all of these, and videos that I'll do that kind of show people how to do some of these things, like how you use the ozone machine, or what my diet looks like, and that sort of thing. And so the questionnaire will go out to the subscribers, and then I hope to be able to set up a Facebook community, and it'll be, allowing those who are kind of going down this path to interact with one another, because I don't want to be a sole voice in the wilderness. I want this to be as much of a dialogue as it could possibly be. And there's a spot on the website as well where you can go on there and send me an email and ask me questions, and I respond to all the questions. And I've gotten some really good questions. I've actually had on at least 6 different occasions, I've had doctors reach out to me and say, look, I'm a doctor, just got diagnosed with cancer. Could you please talk to me? Because, they're well known in what they do. They're well versed in that little bit of space where they practice, but they're not, they don't understand a lot of stuff outside their little kind of wheelhouse. And, when I look at evidence-based medicine, I'd say, what troubles me more than anything else about standard of care and the allopathic so-called evidence-based medicine is it holds itself out there as being somehow better than a lot of the more anecdotal stuff that you get when you go into alternative space, because we don't have anybody paying $20 million to do a clinical trial. but there's a lot of stuff out there that's in the alternative space that's also equally, suspect. Things that people kind of throw around, like if you just drink Kangen water, you're going to cure cancer, things like that. That I think it's also important for people to understand that this does require kind of a very well thought out, systematic, strategic plan. And so my desire, if you will, is to try to get something that has a workable framework to help people really kind of implement these things into their life. And this is just this is just kind of the first part of that process is getting this website up and running, and now I'm turning my attention to social media, and I apologize, those of you, and several people have been to my Facebook page. There's not much there, but a couple of postings. I just wanted to test it, see if I could get it to work. I didn't even have a Facebook account until after I got diagnosed with cancer and I decided I wanted to start this website. So my Facebook account started after I started the website.
Well, your website's beautiful. I have website envy right now. Looking through, it's so beautiful, and really clean. And I'm enjoying how easy it is to look at all this information. You really thought it out so well with the pillars, and so at first I was like, well, how much is this going to cost? It looks really expensive. Your website, I'm like, oh my gosh, this must be really expensive. It looks so good. And you're basically just saying it's free. Just right now, just put your name and email in, and you're really just wanting to build a community at this point and share as much as you can share. And maybe down the road you'll monetize in some way that's gonna benefit everyone. But right now you're just sharing absolutely everything, and as you continue to keep your body in a healing state and keep your body out of a cancering state.
That's right. I still have my day job. I'm still practicing law. Once I can do this full time, then things will actually start to move a little bit.
What kind of law do you practice?
I've always practiced transactional work at a big law firm. So I've worked at several big firms in New York, and now I work for the New York office of a big LA firm. The LA office of a big New York firm. And so I do kind of finance and joint ventures and that sort of thing. I'm the head of the real estate group for a firm called Proskauer here in LA. And so I've been doing that for a long time. And it's good work, and I like my clients, I like what I do, but my passion really is wellness. That's what floats my boat.
Very cool. I can totally tell. Well, this has been wonderful having you on the show, and I really do get a sense that you have done your research. Obviously, I think anyone who can no longer have cancer in their body because of everything that they did, and have their body be out of a cancering state and into a healing state, really has done their work. And I love that you took on the very empowered stance of being at cause in your world instead of being in victimhood. I think a lot of times it's so easy to get into victimhood and to just hand over our power to the doctors and let them just do whatever they're going to do to us, right? And I'm so glad that you didn't. I'm so glad that you really took it upon yourself to learn what you can do to heal yourself. And I think more and more people are waking up and realizing that what systems are in place right now is not working. I think if we can look back and see that when they invented the X-ray machine, there was a time in which we used it in shoe stores because no one knew that X-rays could potentially be harmful. And so it was accepted. It was part of the norm that you go into a shoe store and you could get a bunch of X-rays with your feet in the shoes to know if the shoes fit, right? Exactly. And there was a time in which it was completely acceptable to have lead in our gasoline. Yep. Right. So we have to think back and remember there were times where these things that we now know are so bad were totally fine. DDT, they used to douse, there's pictures if you Google like children DDT and look at the images, black and white photos of children playing in the streets, being doused in DDT. And now, of course, we know that's highly toxic and a horrible thing to do to children. But at the time, it was completely accepted as normal. There will one day come a time when we look back and see that what doctors did to us was totally unacceptable, was as bad as lead in gasoline and X-rays for shoes and DDT being doused on children. That one day we'll finally look back and see that the standard of care now is archaic and that we need to break free. But the only way we're going to break free is by doing it as individuals, because we can't sit and wait for the pharmaceutical companies to gain some kind of conscience. I don't know.
No, that's exactly right. In fact, I've said on more than one occasion, any change that's going to come is not going to come from the top down. It's not going to come from doctors suddenly waking up one morning saying, I need to learn something about ketosis. It's going to come from the patients asking them questions, and they hear that question enough, and they're going to say, wait a second. I mean, my oncologist looks great now because I spent so much time talking to him about my diet that he's actually now reduced his carb intake, and he's lost a lot of weight. He looks terrific. And he walked in the office. I said, Steve, you look great. He goes, yeah, I've been adopting your diet. So, it'll happen slowly, but it's not going to happen from the top down. It really isn't. And I think what you do on your site is terrific. I think more people need to be made aware of these things, and you do a good job of bringing on folks that can help raise that awareness. And I'd be thrilled to come back and talk about in more detail about some of the protocols and that sort of thing. So.
Awesome. We'd love to have you back on the show, especially once you continue to grow your website, because it's such great information, and then you deliver it in a way that's easy to understand, and you really do. You've done your research and you understand the all that's what's going on out there. So thank you so much for coming on the show, and please, listeners, go to questtocurecancer.com. Of course, the links to everything that Eric does is going to be in the show notes of today's podcast, along with his Facebook page that we need to all go like and support him in that. Wonderful.
Again,
absolutely. Enjoy what you heard today on your episode of the Learn True Health podcast. Did something move you, inspire you? Did you get great information that's going to change your life? Awesome. That's exactly what I'm here to do, is to help you gain your health back. Please turn around and share this. If this is something that's helped you in any way, share this with those you love. Love the Learn True Health podcast and want to support us? Awesome. You can go to takeyoursupplements.com and you can support us that way. You'll get access to amazing supplements that are just really great quality for a great price. And there'll be someone on the other end of the line to help you pick out your supplements that are right for you. That's takeyoursupplements.com. Or join our membership, learntruehealth.com/join. That's another great way to support our podcast, support our movement, and you'll be supporting yourself. Gain more information, wonderful videos, wonderful trainings, and you'll also be able to share those with those you love as well. So go to learntruehealth.com/join. Want something fun for free? Go to learntruehealth.com, and right there on the front page, you'll see where you can get our free cookbook. I spent a lot of time making it, and it was so much fun. It's really delicious, healthy recipes. And you can also get our 7-day doctor course. Right there, it's 7 days of naturopathic videos sent right to your inbox, and you can learn from top naturopaths on how to gain health naturally. So that's takeyoursupplements.com for wonderful supplements. learntruehealth.com/join to join our awesome membership, which is only open for a limited time. You can get our free healthy cookbook, and you can also get for free 7 days of wonderful naturopathic videos sent to you. Just go to learntruehealth.com and you'll see it right there on the front page. Thank you so much for being a listener, and thank you for sharing and helping others. Let's spread this information and turn this ripple into a tidal wave.